Joining us on the show right now is the author of the book, The Woman in the Trees, Theoni Bell. It's published by TAN, and it's based around the historical account of apparitions in Wisconsin and the miracles. And so we're going to have a conversation around that. Good morning to you, Theoni Bell.
Hey, Joe. Hi, Rudy.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
Praise be to God. We're glad to have you on. Now, I imagine a lot of people probably have not heard the story of, I have a little statue here of Our Lady of Good Help, given to me by good friends that were leading pilgrimages up there over the years. And but I've never been there myself. So maybe you could start by just telling us what is the story of the Marian apparitions that are approved and the miracles involved.
So they were approved in 2010 by the local bishop in Green Bay. And then a few years later, the United States Council of Catholic Bishops made it a national shrine. So that's what we mean when we say it's church approved. And there are varying levels of this type of approval, but this was deemed worthy of belief after a year of investigation. So to see the apparition, we need to go back to 1859. That's when it happened. And Mary appeared to Adele Bryce. She was 28. She was a Belgian immigrant. And when her family and her people came to Wisconsin, it was just a wilderness. The trees were sometimes 6 feet across. So they lived out secluded in the forest for around 5 years. That means that they had no churches and the priests couldn't travel out there. So they were really losing their faith.
Wow.
So the first apparition happened to Adele while she was walking on a path through the woods. And Our Lady said nothing. Adele was terrified, and she told her family, and they said, it's probably a soul from purgatory, and you should pray for them. She said that Our Lady appeared to hover in between two trees, and she had a yellow sash, blonde hair, and a crown of 12 stars. So again, Our Lady appeared in this same way, saying nothing. So finally, Adele asked her priest, what am I supposed to do? How do I handle this? And her priest advised her to just ask, who are you and what do you want from me? So that same day, after speaking to her priest and going to Mass, she was on the trail on the way home with her sister and a friend, and Our Lady appeared, and Adele got down on her knees, and she finally had the courage to ask Our Lady, who are you and what do you want from me? And this is where we get the message of Our Lady of Good Help. There's two main parts to this message. The first one, Our Lady introduced herself as the Queen of Heaven who prays for the conversion of sinners. She told Adele to offer her communion for sinners, and she said, if they do not convert and do penance, my son will be obliged to punish them. Wow. So that's the first really important part of the message. The second one became the focus of the rest of Adele's life. Our Lady of Good Help said, gather the children in this wild country and teach them what they should know for salvation. So Adele begins trekking through this wilderness from home to home, asking for permission to teach children their catechism. And Our Lady actually said, teach them their catechism and how to approach the sacraments. She went up to 50 miles away from her own home. And we're talking northern Wisconsin, so it was, there's a lot of weather changes in northern Wisconsin. And then eventually she built a chapel, pilgrims started to come, and then they had to build a bigger chapel, and then she built a school and taught the children with Third Order Franciscans, group of women who joined her. So we have the apparition happening in 1859. And then in 1871, we have something called the Great Peshtigo Fire. This happened on the same night as the Great Chicago Fire. And a lot of people believe this was the chastisement that Our Lady spoke of when she said that her son would be punishing those people who did not convert and do penance. So this fire is known as the most devastating fire in the history of America. And it wiped out all the land, all the buildings. It killed so many people in an area the size of Delaware.
Wow.
What happened during that fire, people were awakened in the night, and many of Adele's followers and believers in the apparition, they fled to her chapel, and they sought safety there. They prayed their rosaries, they processed on the grounds, and they processed with a statue of Mary above them all night long while the smoke and fire was just swirling around them. In the morning, a downpour came, and everything within the chapel fence was untouched by the flames, but you could look out of the fence and all you could see was charred remains for miles and miles. So this was more verification that Our Lady had spoken to Adele. And so more pilgrims began to come, and they had to build another chapel. And now today we have the National Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, also called Champion Shrine. So that's the story of the apparition, and I just fell in love with it after a visit.
It's an incredible story, and I think most people don't know it. Now, Sister Adele, what religious community did she belong to?
She didn't. She was educated by the Ursuline sisters in Belgium.
Okay.
And so she knew her catechism. I've been very interested to look at what exactly she would have been learning back then. But she was, people think she was illiterate. Not until the end of her life do we have writing from her in the form of a ledger that she kept for the school. So she was very dedicated to Our Lady. She had gone to her first Holy Communion and confirmation, and she had made a promise with some of her friends that they would become missionaries for Our Lady and serve the poor. So when she had to come to America, she was actually very sad about it, because she had made this promise with her friends, and her priest told her, you need to listen to your parents and you need to go. And if you're supposed to be a missionary, it's going to happen. So she just had no idea what was waiting for her here.
But she wore a habit, though.
She did wear a habit. She wasn't a professed sister. They donned the habit as Third Order Franciscans.
Oh, I see. Okay. And she had one eye.
Yes, she had one eye. So she had an accident as a child with lye, which is what they would use to make soap.
Yeah.
And so she lost her eye. So yes, on top of having to struggle with the wilderness and this mission she was given, she had this disability. She was actually disfigured and was missing an eye. So
made of hardy stock, I imagine, to endure such circumstances. All right, we're going to go to a break. Let's talk about the book a little bit. Tell us, what is the story that you're writing here? We're talking fiction, but how much of this fiction is based on fact? Theoni Bell.
Well, that was kind of the most important thing for me as I wrote this. When I fell in love with the shrine after a visit, I just began to research it and really just want to dig in as far as I could. I decided I wanted to write for the Catholic world. I started a novena to Our Lady of Good Help. She had already answered several prayers for my family. And I started to get, during the novena, I started to get this scene in my head of a little girl sewing by the fire with her mom and this woman coming to the door, this very formidable looking woman with one eye, and how that just seems so bizarre to me. So I couldn't get this scene out of my head, and so I told Our Lady, okay, I get it, I'll write your story. So I was up until 2 or 3 in the morning digging as far as I could into this. I became friends with the communications coordinator at the shrine and the archivist at the shrine. And I really tried to stay as true to the story as I could, and put real life characters, not only Adele, but other families that I learned about who lived in the area and people who had done important things in the Belgian community. I tried to include them. So yes, this story is for middle graders and teens, but I hear from a lot of moms that they love it and they've read it before even sharing it with their children. And basically it tells the story of that little girl who's sewing with her mother. And it starts with that great fire in the first chapter that I told you about earlier. And then it flashes back and forth between, her immigrating to the United States and what it was like to be isolated out in the wilderness. There's a cholera epidemic, the Civil War. there's an innocent love interest, and then there's her meeting Adele and how she learns about the apparition. And she's had a lot of tragedy in her family. Her mother doesn't want her to have anything to do with this strange woman, and but her father gets snagged by this story, and it's kind of this journey to her faith. I really wanted it to be a book that was catechetical, but it had to be good too. It had to be good literature. I knew that kids wouldn't read it and take in any catechesis from it if it wasn't a good book to read and enjoyable.
I think as I was poking through it, I felt like it was really very human in the storytelling here. So there was obviously this following this family on this incredible journey and the difficulties they're facing, but it's really the difficulties of all of these people and how they made these decisions to leave what was known, what was in some ways safe in their home countries, to journey across into a new world and into the unknown. And, sort of being somewhat naive about it, about, things are going to be better in the new world. But in reality, things were very harsh. And maybe you can speak to the incredibly harsh conditions that they found themselves in.
Well, yeah, when they arrived, they had to sleep outside in little huts that they just kind of threw up overnight. And that was after riding for weeks in a wagon across the country just to get out to Green Bay. And then they spent decades felling those trees and clearing the land. They never really stopped until the 1900s. They had to cut all those trees down and tear all those roots out. They had to build all their own roads. They didn't have any roads until they had already been there for about 5 years. But also, cholera swept through, and I discuss this in my book. They didn't have any priests to mourn with them and to aid them. They were also being kind of picked off by some anti-Catholic movements in the area. There was a big problem with that in the U.S. at the time. And so, yeah, they were really isolated and really just alone. But it's kind of what made them so strong.
One of the thoughts that came to mind was that when you're talking about the not having the priest part or how difficult that is, I think of our own time and how scandalized I was personally when priests locked their doors during the pandemic, 15 days of slow spread that went months. And in some cases now they're requiring, vaccination passes to access the sacraments. And yet I feel like people like these immigrants that you've talked about in your book somewhat shame me a little bit because they had to deal with so much more. And yet, isn't this exactly why Our Lady came to Adele to say this is a travesty that has to be corrected?
Yes. And so it was Adele's job to address that problem until the churches could be built, until the priests could travel out there. She had to make sure that the children knew their faith and that they had something to hold on to while they were separated from the church for a time. And I think that's the big message that I take daily from what Mary said. She says, "Do not be afraid, I will help you." Whatever my job is in educating the children that I have and in trying to educate other people about this message, she's helping me. And I think that was her message to everyone. So this has become a very serious meditation for me. How am I educating my children? See, Adele responded to Our Lady during the message, and she said, basically, how am I to teach them who know so little? She, like I said, she was illiterate. And I think that about myself. I know moms and dads struggle with that too. How are we supposed to impart our catechism to our children when nowadays I feel like we ourselves have not been educated in it? I'm a convert, so I obviously wasn't raised Catholic, but educating the children over the last 50 years in the Catholic faith and before has gone way downhill. So we might be able to repeat, the one-liners from the catechism or stuff we picked up in Sunday school, but we don't know those deeper theological and philosophical reasons for why the church teaches what it teaches. And so in a culture like ours, where we're just bombarded all day long by messages and images opposed to our faith, we're very easy to pick off. And so I started to buy catechisms and bring them into my home. I'm not going to say I read all of them. I'm also, I'm in the struggle with everyone else. But I started to look at my own habits. I'm preaching even things as simple as the 10 Commandments, but then I'm envious, and I lack self-control, and I have all these habits that psychology tells us we pass down to our children. Mm-hmm. I know every parent has stepped back and said, wow, I think my child picked that up from me. So this time of writing this book and praying to Mary was kind of painful, but it was very grace-filled, because she and our Lord were showing me, listen, you're writing about teaching the children, and you're making salvation the most important thing. But what are the areas in your life that you need to work on? And so I think that if you're really serious about passing the faith on to your kids, it has to be backed up with the study of it. And I know that catechisms are really hard to read, and some of this stuff is well over my head. But all the Lord wants to see is that every day you're giving it an effort. And eventually he's going to take you to those people and those resources that bring the faith deeper into your family, into your heart.
That's incredible. We really do have the most inspiring mother, and she comes and helps us out. And we see that in almost every apparition. She gives us the advice that we really need at that moment. I'm curious, is there a devotion or anything that people can do, like a novena to Our Lady of Good Success?
Good Help. Sorry.
Oh, Good Help. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes. She has a novena prayer, and the shrine hosts, I think it's 4 novenas a year, but obviously you've heard I do it all the time. It's on my website. It's theonibell.com. I have the novena prayer there, and I have a summary of the apparitions and the fire, and I have images. I've also got a page that talks about catechisms and gives some options for where to start with those. So the main devotion, I think, is the novena. But if you can get out there, this is an American apparition, the first and only one. There's nothing like actually visiting this little humble shrine. It's a national shrine, but it's very humble and very moving.
Yeah, hopefully more people are inspired to take a pilgrimage here in the United States. We can't really leave the country unless you're vaccinated. So.
We have just about a minute left with our conversation with Theoni Bell, and the book is called The Woman in the Trees. It's published by TAN. Encourage you to pick it up. Great book. But in a minute left, so why did you go to this shrine to begin with, Theoni?
I had some prayers, and we got on the internet and we discovered it, and it was close to us. We lived in the Midwest at the time. And so we drove out there and ended up in the crypt. It's a kind of a basement room where the apparition happened. And we prayed that we could conceive, because we were struggling with that. And my husband was trying to get into a philosophy master's program, a paid position. And we prayed, and within 3 months, I had conceived, and we had moved to Vancouver, Canada for this program. So that's why I was moved to figure out more about this. While I was writing, I promised Our Lady that I would pray her novena every time I sat down to write, and that I would never write if I hadn't been to confession. So I think all of that prayer and dedication to it is really what opened me up to be helped, and she did definitely help me during the writing of this book. Answers to novenas all over the place.
Amen. Praise be to God. Theoni Bell, thank you for your time today. The book is called The Woman in the Trees, published by TAN Books, tanbooks.com. Check it out today. Theoni, have a great day. God bless you, and God love you.